The first one, we have to get it out of the way. Let's talk Kalen DeBoer, right? Kalen DeBoer, if you don't know who he is, you should know who he is at this point. Now he's basically at the epicenter of college football right now as the head coach at Alabama. He was with Washington, where he made the college football playoffs, went 25-3, yada yada yada, led two top five offenses, whatever. He was also at Fresno State, where he went 12-6. He was pretty good there. At Indiana, he was the offensive coordinator there with he was a coordinator alongside another player or another person who happens to be on the staff as well, and we'll get to that. Eastern Michigan offensive coordinator. He was also Southern Illinois offensive coordinator, and at Sioux Falls, where it all started for this guy, his alma mater, went 67-3 as a head coach. So all time, this guy is 104-12 as a head coach, and in the postseason, he is 20-4. That is absurd. The guy wins, right? The guy wins.
Yeah,
As
and
Bear,
that's what you want.
as the famous Bama coach always said, Barry Bryant, I ain't never been nothing but a winner. Looks like you're trying to keep the train going. So what are
That's
your
getting the board, and
thoughts?
I give them a ton of credit. Greg Byrne had an impossible task, and that coaching search was about as you know public as you have. Even though everything was happening behind closed doors, and nobody really knew a ton of stuff except obviously the man Jimmy Sexton, which Matthew put out a great YouTube short on for him. Go check out our channel for that. But yeah, he what he did is first of all he had to replace a goat with a limited um I wouldn't say limited check, but in terms of having to pay off some of these crazy buyouts that other guys had, and now he'll say that Kalen DeBoer was the guy all along, and I do believe that. I do actually believe that in terms of realistic candidates. I do think if Kirby Smart was out there, would have said yes, then you would have taken him. I think Steve Sarkisian was a potential successor plan back when he was on staff there at Bama. He gets offered the Texas job. Obviously, that changes all of that. Hard to leave Texas and that NIL program right now, and the way that program's coming for Alabama, as great as the job of Alabama really is as well. And obviously, Dan Lanning, a lot has been made of his buyout over at Oregon, at least 20 million, probably more than that. And obviously the NIL structure with Phil Park or with Phil Knight and Nike all over there in the Northwest there. So yeah, Kalen DeBoer, I think he what Bama could have done, what they did with some other coaches after Bear Bryant and other coaches where like they've had lack of success, right? They've hired SEC guys and guys that look the part, win the press conference, and get the fan behind them and like, oh my gosh, I've heard of this guy. This is the SEC guy. We know he's going to be able to recruit well at the beginning. Sure, keep on this momentum. But this was the right guy for the job. Make no mistake about that. This could not have been a better hire realistically that Alabama could have made. He is so good. Like you said, he's a winner. He's won everywhere he's done it. His staff is so incredible everywhere he's been. And obviously at Bama, with the resources they have and the opportunity that's there now with Kalen DeBoer, this staff he's put together is incredible, which we'll get into. He brought over Courtney Morgan as a GM there to retain some guys and keep track of the team. It is, it was so impressive what's happened there in the last, 7, 8 days at Alabama, and obviously the last 4 or 5 days since he's been hired there. Obviously, I'm sure he hasn't slept much. He won't sleep much the next couple of months. Obviously, with all the portal exits, very, very tough. Obviously, he's coming into a new ground, the SEC, which is getting bigger and harder than it's ever been. And obviously, having to recruit in a spot where you've never had to recruit against these teams and against these firepowers with, well, which is crazy to say, lesser NIL talent, like lesser things to come to the table than Georgia and Texas and Oregon and other places like that, even Ole Miss right now. So it's a really tough job for him. But if anyone can do it, I think it's him. And I also think with the talent that's already there, right, even though a lot's leaving, they are one of the deepest, most talented rosters in the country. Top three. You can't really argue much lower than that. Um, I think with him, his staff, his X's and O's, his culture, they can win right away there. And obviously, we'll see what happens in the spring portal. But yeah, this is to me, this is super exciting. I've talked myself into a massive Kalen DeBoer fan for Alabama fans.
So you mentioned that a lot of the past coaches that they had brought in for Alabama after these legends, right, all had that SEC footprint, right? And they recruited in that Southeast really well and in the traditional spots well. And you mentioned that Kalen DeBoer doesn't exactly have the same footprint as those guys, right? And that's why it's so important to bring in a good staff, right? I'm gonna let you take over and talk a little bit about the staff that Kalen DeBoer has brought in because I know you're very excited about it.
So there's three groups that he's really hiring from. You've got his group from Washington that he knows and he's bringing back over. He's got the group of coaches that were already on staff that some he tried to keep and some he didn't try to keep. Some he was successful in keeping, some he wasn't. Obviously, most notably Tavares Robinson going over to Georgia to be the co-defense coordinator. There were rumors that he might have come back. Twitter was buzzing on Alabama tweet. They were going crazy. Everyone was deleting their old tweets about ripping on T-Rob and whatnot, preparing that he was going to come back. He interviewed for hours with Greg Byrne, with Kalen DeBoer to get the job there. They offered him a massive contract to be the full defensive coordinator for Alabama. He obviously turned it down, went over to Georgia. And maybe some players will follow him as well, which we'll talk about in a second. So he's gone. You got to replace him, his spot, and then obviously defensive coordinators. You're keeping Freddie Roach and you're keeping Robert Gillespie right on staff. That's the D line coach, Freddie Roach, and the running back coach, Robert Gillespie. Which, for my money, I think were two of the better groups of this team this past year. This running back talent room was so talented, recruited so well. It did such a good job. Developing, splitting carries, finding guys, finding different types of players in this room. We mentioned Roydell Williams. He's obviously in the portal, but we love him. Jason McClellan had a great playoffs and season otherwise than that. We got the young guy, Justice Haynes and Richard Young. You got two freshmen coming in that are uber talented. And obviously, Jam Miller, the ultra versatile back there as well for Gillespie and staff to take advantage of. Right. And then obviously Freddie Roach, you know that Bama D line has had multiple guys. They'll send another guy to the first round this year. Tim Smith, who knows where he's going to do. Very good player in his own right. You got some other guys. They're bringing in LT Overton from A&M, guy we did a video on. Check that out if you want to learn more about him in the portal. You're obviously very high on him and obviously know a lot about him as an Aggie yourself. Those are two staffs, two guys that I'm very happy that they did keep. And obviously on the offensive side, they brought in everybody else from Washington. And that is such a warm welcome. Obviously, if you're an Alabama fan, you tried to hire Ryan Grubb a year ago. You went over to Washington and you had a blank checkout and you said, hey, what's it going to take to get you to come down to Alabama? He says no. He realizes, hey, the talent we have in our room. I love Kalen DeBoer, right? We have a good thing going on at Washington right now. Let's ride it out for one more year. And he does that. And obviously, the wide receivers, you got to Dylan Johnson, by the way, was your backup running back. Okay, their starting running back got hurt all the way back in fall camp. That was a big deal. He emerged later in the year, 1,000-yard rusher. Obviously, first-round receivers, McMillan, Polk, and obviously Roma Dunze to cap it all off. Good tight end as well. Bringing over the tight end coach, bringing over Huff, the O-line coach, Joe Moore winning O-line, a guy that's recruited pretty well for Washington and obviously developed extremely well as well. And that's very important with a bunch of those guys in the portal right now. Hopefully you bring some in and make up for some losses at center and left tackle. And obviously, I think it's Jamarcus Russell, right? The wide receiver coach, a guy that probably the best at his position. I would say top 5 guy at his position coach, a guy that's developed and recruited super well at Washington. And also you bring in there with the talent that Alabama has and the capabilities that they can bring in guys as well. That's all very, very exciting on the offensive side of the ball. Defensive coordinators, right? You're going to have co-defense coordinators. To me, I think the primary one will be Kane Womack, paired with a guy like Maurice Linguist, both guys that were head coaches at the G5 level. Kane Womack, you know him from South Alabama, the Jaguars down there in Mobile, Alabama, a guy with Southern ties, a guy that knows Kalen DeBoer back when they were at Indiana, right? Indiana in 2019, DeBoer was the offensive coordinator and Womack was the defensive coordinator. Indiana had a very successful year in 2019 and 2020 while Womack was there. Unprecedented for that program, which we know, which we talked about with Indiana this offseason. Those guys, I think Maurice Linguist can root pretty well. He's obviously has NFL ties. He has SEC ties with A&M. Also, he was going to be the defense coordinator at Michigan a couple years ago before he was hired away to be the full-time head coach at Buffalo. Those two guys walked away from head coaching jobs to become coordinators at the Power 5 level, the Power 2 level, which shows you just how much money there is to be going around for some of these coordinator positions, which is tough for them. And obviously, I think they have a couple more spots to fill on that staff. On the defensive side, I think one more. I would assume the linebacker position. And we'll see what they do there, though. But yeah, this to me, I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I love this staff. This is about as good as you can because you mentioned some of the criticism of DeBoer at Alabama was fit. And that fit was due to recruiting ties and just lack of SEC ties in the southeast part of the country. And with the offensive guys he brought over from Washington, that didn't really solve it. But also those guys can flat out coach. So I don't really care, right? And then also you're keeping a couple key staff guys, Gillespie and Roach, but also the defensive coordinators guys. You're bringing in very experienced head coaches, right? Or very experienced coaches and guys with Southern ties and guys with ties to recruiting, to developing, and to running a program, and obviously helping you get acclimated at a place like Alabama. Because let's be honest, right? The responsibilities of running a program like Alabama, the boosters with the staff and the expectations, a little bit different than running at Washington or Sioux Falls or Fresno State and all that other stuff. I know Kalen DeBoer can do it, but I think it's awesome that he's surrounding himself with other very experienced coaches and head coaches who know the responsibilities, know what it takes, and he can take off the load of him and help out that defense and make him worry just more on overall team or offense and whatnot, which he wants to do.
Yeah, I think you mentioned this to me on air or off air before we got on here that this staff might be better than the staff that Saban had. And I agreed with you to some degree. Like I agree with you there. Like this is a really good staff. When we talk about, oh, does this guy fit? Does this guy fit? Does this guy fit? Is is this person a good coach? Right? Sometimes that's what it comes down to. Get a good coach before you get a good fit. That's what I say. Good coaches can fit. They can fit anywhere they go. Kalen DeBoer was at Sioux Falls. He was at Indiana. He's at Fresno State. He's at Washington. He's at Eastern Michigan. He's been everywhere, right? He's been everywhere except the Southeast, all right? So to say that he can't adapt to his surroundings is preposterous. Preposterous. These transfer portal players, some of these really, really, really big names, we're going to get to those guys later in the video. Spoilers. Those are really big. And no one's expecting a national championship in the first year. But when we give out our grades, when me and you give out our grades, we look at expectations, right? We say an A would be exceeding those expectations, right? A B would be meeting those expectations. And a C would be not meeting those expectations. So I think a lot of people would be quick to grade Kalen DeBoer an A higher. But the thing is, the expectations at Alabama, and correct me if I'm wrong, it is more than one national championship per decade.
Yeah, and to be honest, fair or not, that is what the expectation is now because of what Saban did and because of how he did it, how quickly he did it in year three. Year two, they were undefeated, going to play number one Florida or number two Florida at the time because you were number one, right? And obviously, year three, you won it all, going undefeated in Pasadena, beating Texas there. So obviously, with what's happening in this portal era and the 12-team playoffs, it might be a little bit harder than ever to win national titles. But at the same time, like that's what you get when you took this job. You know that. That's what the expectation is. You don't have to come and be Saban. You don't have to win five, right? Or six in 12 years, 17 years, whatever it was. But you also have to win national championships. You have to.
Yes. So that is exactly why I will give this hire a B, a flat B. I think it can meet expectations. I think it can meet expectations. Which, by the way, is absurd that I am saying that, by the way. That is absurd that I'm saying that he can meet the expectations of the Bama fans and the ADs after the greatest coach of all time was just there at Alabama winning 6 national championships. I think that's an amazing, that's probably the best grade that I could have possibly given. If you were to say A, you're basically saying you just hired Nick Saban 2.0, right? If you were to give
Yeah,
this hire
yeah.
an A, you're saying this coach is as good, if not better, than Nick Saban.
Yeah, and that is crazy. Do not listen to anybody who says that because yes, while DeBoer, who knows? He could win four straight right now and do something that's never been done ever, right? But the reality is like that's probably not going to happen. And to say that someone is going to be better than Saban, nobody has proof. Nobody can do that what he did at that level. Um, and so we'll see. And also, in large part, thanks to him, Saban, there are all these rules in college football and programs that are just firing on all cylinders because he pushed them to become that good. And now his successor, Kalen DeBoer, has to deal with those consequences. We have programs like Oregon and Texas, Ohio State, all just Georgia humming nationally, NIL and otherwise as well. So yeah, this is an incredibly tough spot to be in. I'm gonna go B plus because I am a little bit higher than you, right? And I do think he wins at least. I do two in a decade is crazy, but also I would just slim the expectation down just a little bit because of the 12 team playoffs, because of how much harder it will be to win national championships. So
or easier.
or easier because if you get in, then it's so hard to outcoach
Because
Kalen DeBoer.
what if you're hurt at the beginning of the year, and then you get a guy coming back for the playoffs. It's like kind of a it's an interesting thing to argue and talk about, but I'll accept your slimming down of the expectations.
And that's why I'm gonna go B plus here because I think if he wins two national titles in this decade, like that would be incredibly successful tenure for him at Alabama. That would
Absolutely.
be
That'd
incredible.
be insane. If he wins a national championship for Alabama, that is a good hire, great hire, an excellent hire.
Yeah, exactly. It's about as good as you can do, especially with everything going on. And obviously, short term, it looks all doom and gloom. I know a lot of Bama fans right now are freaking out. You got like, all these guys in the portal. Saban's gone. All of a sudden, you're not the big bad wolf anymore, and you're doing to you're ugh, teams are doing to you what you have done to them for so long. It doesn't feel so good on the other side, but I get it though. There's nerves. There's a lot of unanswered questions to see how will he recruit, how will he maintain expectations, how he does. The thing is, he's a killer, man. I think Kalen DeBoer is an absolute killer. He is cold blooded. He knows exactly what he needs to do to get it done. You talk about a guy like Nick Saban that was process oriented, all the best things about him in creating a winning environment. I think Kalen DeBoer knows all that and he will be able to replicate that kind of environment and that kind of culture. We'll see what will lead to championships. I don't know, but I do think this was a great hire for Alabama, and that's why I'll go B plus.
I do want to put on the record too. I gave this hire a B. The only person that they could have hired that I would have given an A would be Kirby Smart, and that was never going
Yes,
to happen. That was
yeah,
never going to happen. That is the only person that I could have possibly given an A to. So in my eyes, this is probably the best possible hire. It was the
to
best
me, to me,
realistic hire to me. To
I do
me,
think Sark would have been really interesting. Now, I do think that DeBoer, first of all, is 2-0 against Sark, by the way. We'll just say that with probably less talent, which is probably really interesting. But also,
not
like, I do think
probably like
Sark,
with less talent.
yes. Okay, yes, exactly. Well, a year ago, maybe. I don't know. But regardless, yes, yes, yes. But Sark would have been interesting. I do think, like, this is exactly why Greg Byrne, first of all, is an incredible AD, right? With an impossible task. This is why he makes the hires instead of the Alabama fan base or instead of Twitter fan bases or in message boards because message boards would have thrown everything at Dan Lanning, right? A guy that was Southern ties. Now he's very good. He will thrive at Oregon. I'm sure he will. Or a guy like Lane Kiffin or somebody else with SEC ties, right? Blah, blah, blah. A good recruiter that you know he's going to be able to maintain the recruiting levels that Nick Saban did. But also, like, it's Bama. Okay. You can fall out of bed with a top 10 class. Okay. Like Kalen DeBoer, he's a grinder. You know he'll get it done on the recruiting trail. I'm not too concerned with that. Will he be top three every year? I don't know, but I'm sure he'll have a talented enough roster to win titles and to compete for them every year. But to me, this is just such a just a just I have nothing. I cannot be more up, applauding, right? Is that the word of this Alabama administration at handling this and to find a guy and zero in a guy like Kalen DeBoer?